So now let's take a look at the second part of this lecture, which is about the fixation of beliefs, evaluation of four different methods for fixing belief. He rejects three and he accepts one. The three he rejects are known in the article as the method of tenacity, the method of authority, and the a priori method. And the method that he accepts he calls the method of science. So what's wrong with the method of tenacity? What is the method of tenacity? Well, essentially in the method of tenacity, and we're familiar with all of these, I have to say, these are drawn from life. These are not made up by Peirce. In the method of tenacity, someone fixes their belief by maybe repeating it to themselves, by restricting their inputs, what they listen to, what they hear, what they watch, what they, talking maybe to people who don't challenge them, getting in their filter bubble, and so forth. And in some cases, clinging to their beliefs regardless of what comes at them. This could come from ambivalence about what to believe. It could come from a fear of changing one's mind, or maybe an addiction to the certainty of one's opinion. So there are people who believe what they believe, and they're not going to change their mind, and they hang on to it regardless of what comes at them. They may even arrange their lives so that they can hang on to them more effectively. This is not really an irrational method from a psychological standpoint. The person who uses this method doesn't want to engage in reasoning. It's not that they can't reason, but they choose not to reason. This is just a different value, right? It's not that they can't reason, but they choose not to. Peirce objects to this method of fixing belief because he thinks that it's not a method that can really work in the long run. Beliefs are social in nature, right? We're influenced by other people. We're involved with other people. We hear things. We see things. And he says, the ostrich might stick his or her head in the sand, but sooner or later the ostrich has to remove their head from the sand. And when they do, they find out that others may think differently, and maybe even that their beliefs seem better, more effective, more convincing. So he says the social impulse is against the method of tenacity. We engage in it only on, I guess, the most dire of emotional, out of the most dire of emotional needs. But it's not a method which fixes belief very effectively in the long run. The second method he discusses is the method of authority. In this method, belief is fixed by, typically, by some larger group. It could be, a family. It could be the state. It could be corporation. It could be different forces in the media. Typically, belief will be fixed by things like the manipulation of information, selectively presenting information, propaganda, by revisionism, by censorship. Authority, the method of authority can be quite effectively enforced by terror, by scapegoating, by prisons, and even by massacres. It's a highly effective method, and it's often used by institutions historically. Smaller groups can use the method too. And Peirce says about this, he says, wherever there is an aristocracy or a guild or any association or class of men whose interests depend or are supposed to depend on certain propositions, there will inevitably be found some traces of this natural product of social feeling. Cruelties always accompany this system, and when it is consistently carried out, they become atrocities of the most horrible kind in the eyes of any rational man. So you might try to think of what are some of the truths that are fixed for us by authorities in our culture. The first duty is to the shareholders, is something that students are frequently taught in business about what corporations are supposed to believe. One cannot be a feminist and be against choice is another truth that you could see being sort of coerced or encouraged by a certain subgroup. The German people must be of pure Aryan stock only, right? I mean, so there are lots of these kinds of examples, and we don't even have to debate the content of them. The point is that whenever the survival of an organization depends on the immovable truth of a belief, it will fix those beliefs by its authority, by hook or by crook, right? Otherwise, the belief and the institution on which relies on it is threatened with extinction, right? So Peirce's objection to this method, so it's very effective, and I guess we see examples of it all around us. But Peirce's objection to why it doesn't effectively fix belief is, well, he says, first of all, that this method is fine for people who want to remain intellectual slaves. But he says, in some ways, like the other method of tenacity, over time this method slips, right? Not everyone can be controlled, and eventually social discourse produces ideas that question the authority, and so you sort of have a crumbling of the wall, so to speak. It's very hard to get everyone to believe correctly all the time. And once that wall starts to crumble and people start to realize that maybe this is not true, it spreads to other things. Maybe that's not true, and maybe other people could be right when they say, don't believe this thing that they're telling us, and so forth. Okay. The third method Peirce considers is what he calls the a priori method. In the a priori method, and this is a very general characterization, but in the a priori method, methods of this kind, belief is not fixed by sheer dogmatism or by authority, right, by tenacity or authority. It's fixed by, in a way, a desire for logically, theoretically derived certainty, right? Only possible among ideas that are not based in experience, right? Such as Descartes' clear and distinct ideas. So this is the a priori method of truth is endemic or emblematic of many systems of metaphysics throughout the ages. So Peirce's objections to the third method, the a priori method, is, first of all, it cannot stand up to experience, right? Contradictions arise and they overturn these beliefs. Second, it is just the source of an enormous disagreement, right? Metaphysicians classically cannot agree, even though they have come to their conclusions, right, deductively and logically and, right, apodictically. Contradictions arise between them. There's not an agreement, and since there's no factual basis, agreement is impossible. So truth becomes, in this system, a matter of taste.